I've been a longtime fan of the Nintendo 64, but trying to play that system nowadays isn't exactly fun. N64's yellow, red, and white composite cables do not play well with your modern HD and 4K TV. It'll end up looking like you've smeared Vaseline all over your screen with a side of bucket loads of input lag. So if you want a Nintendo 64 to look and play at its absolute worst, this is the way to do it. But let's say you don't want that. Well, you could open up a Nintendo 64 and perform hardware surgery by grafting on new components. Or you could buy hundreds of dollars of external gear to upconvert that old signal from one of these into one of these. Or maybe you went the no-frills route and bought one of these ultra-cheap Amazon HDMI converters. Well, do not use these! They just create way more input lag. And, well, they also look terrible as well. So none of those options are particularly easy, or if they are easy, they are not very good. Well, what if someone made a completely new Nintendo 64 from scratch with the latest resolutions and newest technologies in mind? Something was sent in to us to review that is aiming to change the Nintendo 64 gaming scene forever. This is the Analogue 3D, a new FPGA Nintendo 64 compatible console from Analogue. We've reviewed this company's other systems like their Super NT, Mega SG, and Pocket hardware. And what we have learned from all the experiences we've had with them, their stuff works really, really well. It's not a stretch to say that each of their systems have become some of the best, if not the best ways to play classic video games. What's special about the 3D is all in its name. This is Analogue's first attempt at a platform heavily focused on 3D polygonal graphics. Not only that, but it's their first 4K resolution console as well. Do these folks have what it takes to pull off a miracle again with the Nintendo 64 catalog? Well, I'm very excited to show you what this thing can do. The Analogue 3D is a sleek, thin system. It looks like something Sony would have designed if they built their own Nintendo 64. It's a sharp look, but unlike the Nintendo 64 original, which was passively cooled, this little guy has a fan inside, which you will hear when it turns on. It's not loud enough to distract, but it is there. Analogue even warns you to keep the area around the system clear so that it can properly cool down. So don't go stuffing this into a tiny little cubbyhole like you may have done with the original Nintendo 64. This system needs breathing room. This is a new advanced piece of hardware designed to play physical retro games. This is a situation ripe for deep graphical analysis, and I'm sure you're expecting a crazy in-depth look at exactly what technical specifications of what this system is capable of, with complicated numbers, graphs, intense frame-per-second breakdowns, super scientific outlines of every bit of detail, and every single pixel explored in excruciating detail. Well, we're not gonna do that here. What we are going to do is answer one question that I believe is most important for all us Nintendo fans, and it's a big one. Is the Analogue 3D better than a real Nintendo 64? So let's have a look at how the Analogue 3D stacks up. Let's start with Perfect Dark. Now, my first impressions here, this is exactly what I was looking for. I could run this next to a real Nintendo 64 and not notice a difference. And that, folks, is extremely hard to get right. Playing it a bit more, I also noticed that they haven't changed the gameplay experience. It still feels authentic to the original designer's intent. Perfect Dark was a title that used the Nintendo 64 expansion pack, an additional memory unit that you swapped out at the front of the Nintendo 64 control deck. With the Analogue 3D, that's simply a flick of a switch in the settings. It's all pre-built right in, so for a game like this, you're good to go. To make sure a game could be completed without any weird bugs, glitches, or errors, I cleared Star Fox 64 in one sitting. Start to finish, it played exactly as you'd expect. This system even catches and displays that digital noise effect they put in that some emulators miss. Just for comparison, the Eon Super 64 was my favorite way to play N64 games for a good while now. It is a simple plug-and-play option for the original Nintendo 64 hardware, but it's not cheap. It's a good option, but the Eon is in standard definition and doesn't hit 4K like the Analogue does. And it also doesn't feature high dynamic range or auto low latency mode. If you're using a TV that supports these features, the Analogue 3D is gonna make your games look and play leagues better. Next up, GoldenEye 007. Here once again, the Analogue is giving me the exact experience I hope to have with this classic first-person shooter. Even when you compare this side by side with authentic hardware, the timing and speed of everything on screen is matching up perfectly. Just for reference, here's GoldenEye on the Analogue 3D on one side of the screen and real Nintendo 64 hardware being captured with one of those terrible Amazon garbage boxes on the other. Whether it was collecting golden coins on Super Mario 64, or rushing around corners on Wave Race 64, or hunting down a bunch of creatures in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, on the Analogue 3D, they all looked and played correctly. No matter what I tried, the game started and played just like we would all expect. The Analogue 3D has a real Nintendo 64 cartridge slot at the top that will take your physical games, 4 original Nintendo 64 controller ports, and also supports Bluetooth wireless controllers. This console also has an SD card slot in the back for save storage and system data. But I know what a lot of you are thinking, and no, this thing does not run ROM files. You'll need real Nintendo 64 carts to play games on here. And the whole thing powered by an FPGA. To keep this very simple, an FPGA is a chip inside this console that Analogue programmed to behave like a real Nintendo 64. It's not like the emulators on your PC or even Nintendo Switch Online's N64 gaming library. The Analogue 3D is effectively reproducing what a real Nintendo 64 console would actually do. Why is this important? Because nobody has ever done this before. A real Nintendo 64 cannot output 4K, utilize modern HDR, and tap into your TV's auto-low latency mode. Analogue 3D does all of that. The image coming out of this is clean and very, very fast. That auto-low latency mode is good stuff. Input responsiveness is key for all sorts of games, and racing games especially. Mario Kart 64 feels essentially just as responsive as playing it on a CRT. I was having no trouble at all hitting that accelerator right when the light changed to get that all-important starting boost in time trial mode. The only criticism I have for the HDR is that there doesn't seem to be a brightness control or calibration setting. My TV is very bright, so it looked okay to me, but everybody's TV is different, so I hope they update the system to include calibration in the future. And do it better than Nintendo did with the Switch 2, because what they did sucks and doesn't actually work properly. Sorry, Nintendo. Here is something people might not know. Some N64 games support widescreen mode. Not every TV could do this properly at the time, and even modern TVs struggle with this option, including my brand new TV, which I was very upset to discover. But now, with the Analogue 3D's image fit options, it just does all the work and outputs the corrected image to your TV with the right settings. I think this is a really cool way to experience a version of these games you might not have realized were possible. Heck, Jet Force Gemini basically advertised this feature right when you started it up on the title screen, and now it looks better than ever when you turn it on. Oh, and the game audio coming out from the Analogue 3D sounds really good. Everything I've heard sounds very accurate and clean. Despite Analogue's namesake, the HDMI connection is giving you an audio signal that is digital, not analog. Depending on your past CRT setup, you might get a hum or buzz, but that isn't happening here. So yes, the Analogue 3D can give you a polished yet authentic gameplay experience, with all the good and bad that go along with that. Because remember folks, these are old games. Some of them naturally run at a slow frame rate and don't have high resolutions. But if you're feeling adventurous, then this console has a few special party tricks that'll make your classic titles feel like they got an upgrade. Take Perfect Dark, one of the few games designed to use the N64 expansion pack. It's a notoriously demanding N64 title. On legacy hardware, your frame rate is going to chug. And if you use the game's built-in high-res mode, you basically turn this poor thing into a slideshow on a real Nintendo 64. But on the Analogue 3D, you have overclock abilities meant to improve performance. And as far as my experience goes, these settings are a game changer. You have a selection of preset enhancements. These modify aspects of the simulated original hardware. But don't worry, if you're a purist and don't want the Analogue 3D doing anything to change how your games run, there's a Force Original Hardware toggle. This keeps your game library running pretty much exactly how it did on an original 64. Basically, what I'm getting at is there's plenty of options to suit varied tastes. If you really want Perfect Dark looking like this, well, you can just let your freak flag fly, friend. If you really want Perfect Dark looking like that, well, you can just let your freak flag fly. Well, you can just let your freak flag fly. Freak flag fly, friend. Why did I write that? 4 Fs. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get it. You can just let your freak flag fly, friend. Freak flag fly. Freak flag, I'm gonna do it. At the time of review, these settings are listed as experimental, and they sure are. I did catch some issues. For example, when I tried the most intense mode, which is called Unleashed, with Donkey Kong 64, the game's intro displayed a solid black screen that I couldn't get out of. Yup, I could still hear the game running some of the audio, but I couldn't see anything at all. Right now, I recommend sticking with either Auto Setting if you're not looking for any crazy changes, or trying Enhanced Plus if you want to see real performance boosts. I had the best experience across multiple games with these two settings. With Enhanced Plus turned on, Perfect Dark practically flew, demonstrating noticeably smoother frame rates you'd probably never expect a Nintendo 64 was capable of. It doesn't introduce any new issues from what I could see. It's everything Perfect Dark always wanted to be. Then, with high-res mode activated, the stuttery, borderline unplayable frame rate on real hardware is gone. And I was shocked at how good it looked. People avoided ever turning this thing on at the time because of the performance cost. But now with Analogue 3D, you get the nice crispy visuals and a frame rate that won't burn your eyeballs. But let's say you're missing that original TV look. You know, the way a CRT screen displayed these games? Well, you can make use of the system's original display modes to make your modern TV look like a brand spanking new CRT or tube television. At 4K resolution, these modes look very good. In fact, I found them so convincing that I had problems telling footage apart from the Analogue 3D and the ones we captured with an actual Sony Trinitron television. How about you? Can you tell what console this is from? The eagle-eyed of you out there might recognize that this is in fact not a real CRT. It's the Analogue 3D CRT mode. This is the best execution of a CRT effect I've ever seen coming straight out of a console. It's pretty impressive. And by the way, to look at this with the best effect, please use 4K on whatever screen you're looking at. There's a lot of very minor details that will be hidden if you look at this image in a standard definition screen. The one thing the Analogue 3D isn't doing is upscaling the game's graphics. Every title plays at their original resolution with original graphics. They're just output in a clean digital 4K signal that your modern TV will know how to display. And if I'm gonna have only one way to play these games, this is the way to go. So you think I'm wrong? Well, have a look at these games running on Nintendo Switch Online. Nintendo is running these games using software emulation with an increased resolution and frame rate, so you'll get graphical glitches. This line in Perfect Dark, this is not visible on original Nintendo 64 hardware or the Analogue 3D. One of the most glaring issues I found in Perfect Dark is every single light source in the game appears to be broken or flickering. On this rooftop at the very start of the game, you'll see a flickering light. This is not flickering on either of the other systems. And sometimes the Switch Online version doesn't show the light source at all. This fan blade that blocks the lights behind it as it slowly rotates is constantly shining on Switch Online, breaking a really cool effect on the original Nintendo 64. And of course, you can still see it on the Analogue 3D. Software emulators can mess up games bad. Take GoldenEye 007 for example. Some programs run the game ultra fast, having James Bond practically speedwalk onto the screen in literally the first moments of the game's intro. Some N64 games running this fast make them practically unplayable. But even if the game doesn't functionally break, running these games at a higher resolution is still a bad idea. This is from the very beginning of Super Mario 64 running on Nintendo Switch Online. Do you see Lakitu there by the door? Well, you shouldn't be able to see this little guy. On an original Nintendo 64, or even with the Analogue 3D, the proper resolution hides this from view. If you squint, you can barely make it out. But it's clearly the intention that he be camouflaged in with the stone and the door until it's time for him to float down in front of Mario. He's not supposed to stand out. The resolution offered from Nintendo's online service emulation is actively pumping out incorrect visuals to the player. This looks sloppy. And for those of you out there that are familiar with the Mister, well, the Mister doesn't output 4K. And it also doesn't use real Nintendo 64 cartridges. So while it may be capable of playing Nintendo 64 games with an FPGA, it's not exactly the same experience. Even though I prefer to play these games at their original resolution, I've gotta admit, I'd like some different resolution settings to play around with. Right now, that's simply not an option. But if I know Analogue at all, they're going to be updating this in the future with even more abilities with ongoing software updates. And if I can make a suggestion, I think one feature people would greatly appreciate is downsampling, or stronger anti-aliasing methods to soften out the hard edges on the 3D models. Another setting that's missing is being able to force progressive scan. All this is accurate, but having even more visual options to tune the game to how you see fit would be a welcome addition. Something I think plenty of people would like to see. But the image quality and general gameplay of the console means almost nothing if you don't have the right controller, and the Nintendo 64 controller is maybe more iconic than the console itself. So just how do you control the Analogue 3D? Well, if you're a purist, then they've got you covered. The Analogue 3D comes with 4 fully functional Nintendo 64 controller ports, just like the original system. So if you have any classic wired gamepads, you're good to go. And you can pop in your controller packs, rumble packs, and transfer packs in your controller's cartridge slot, and they work just like you'd expect. A little while ago, I modified an original Nintendo 64 controller with a new 8-bit do Hall Effect thumbstick, and it also ran on here perfectly. I even tried to throw the 3D a curveball. This here is Hey You Pikachu, and it utilizes a rarely used accessory for the Nintendo 64, which was the Nintendo 64 voice recognition unit, complete with a microphone. Using this, you can have a full-on conversation with Pikachu. Kinda? Sorta? This works just as well on Analogue 3D as it does on real Nintendo hardware, which is to say, sometimes Pikachu does a thing, and sometimes he doesn't. So for any of you Hey You Pikachu fans out there, rejoice, because the experience is still authentically this. But back to controllers. What if you don't have a real Nintendo 64 gamepad? Well, Analogue worked with 8-bit do to make something new. This is the 8-bit do 64 Bluetooth controller. It's a modern wireless gamepad designed to pair with the Analogue 3D. It has a built-in rechargeable battery, and unlike a real Nintendo 64 controller, this little device has rumble built in. On the back of the Analogue 3D console, there are 2 USB ports that can charge your controllers while you play, just in case you forgot to plug them in before a big gaming session. Every button on an original controller is here, and then some. Instead of one Z trigger in the center, you now have dual mirrored Z triggers, one under each shoulder button. There's also modern buttons along the top because this isn't only for Nintendo 64 games. These gamepads also work with the Switch 1 and 2, Windows, and even Android. And all of this is bundled in a modern package rather than the traditional 3-grip design. I'm just gonna come right out and say it. I like this new layout better than a stock Nintendo 64 controller. It's incredibly easy to reach every single button you need without having to drastically recalibrate your hands like on Nintendo's Trident controller. Not only that, but this controller actually houses a pretty incredible upgrade. This is rocking a Hall Effect thumbstick. If you've not seen our video talking about these little wonders, Hall Effect sticks are very, very good. The Nintendo 64's optical thumbstick is notorious for breaking down over time, resulting in increasingly worse gameplay experiences. And this isn't a new problem. This started happening when the console was still modern. But that won't be happening with a Hall Effect stick. It's gonna last a good long while. This 8-bit do gamepad gives me everything I've wanted in a modern Nintendo 64 controller experience, and I completely recommend them for use with a 3D. That is, with a warning. If you have controller packs, otherwise known as memory cards, with game saves you want to keep using, or if you want access to your Pokemon in Pokemon Stadium with the transfer pack, then you cannot use this 8-bit Do controller. It has Rumble covered, sure, and the console has virtual memory cards built in for new data and save files, but for the other stuff, well, you need to use an original controller. There's no other way to access those peripherals. But if you don't have original data you need to access and you're fine using this new 8-bit Do gamepad, then you'll find the Analogue is designed to switch pretty easily between your virtual memory card and the Rumble. Just hit the new select button at the top. Done. This is ultra quick and simple to use. Way easier than actually switching between a memory card and real Rumble pack. I do have criticisms with how the Analogue 3D treats saves though. There is no built-in save file explorer to browse your virtual memory cards, and no way to have multiple memory cards for each one game cartridge. Each game gets one virtual memory card, and that's it. You manage the save data through the game's original built-in methods. I think it's a missed opportunity to not have improved on the Nintendo 64's original lackluster approach to managing save files. And the limit of one card per game cartridge is exactly that, limiting. Take Mario Kart 64 for example. This game utilizes a full memory card just to save 2 time trial ghosts. 2! That's all you get! With a digital manager, I could switch between as many memory cards as I like, but without one, stuck with just 2 ghosts. Yeah, I don't know how many people actually use this feature, but I do. It makes me a better racer. And if you use a multi-cart like the EverDrive 64 that I have, you'll only get 1 memory card for the entire cartridge no matter what you play on it. See how that can be a bit confusing? Nintendo's official accessories and controllers work with the Analogue 3D, but for the third-party stuff, it might not. I pulled out the Retro Fighters Brawler 64, a wireless Nintendo 64 controller that has a dongle that plugs up to the controller port on the front. Well, to my surprise, this didn't work. Every other Bluetooth and USB wired controller I threw at it simply didn't work as well. Nothing for the Switch, nothing from Xbox. We followed up with Analogue about this lack of third-party controller compatibility, and we found out that this is just for launch, and more controller compatibility will be coming in future updates. Even though it's good to have options, I think most gamers will prefer to use a controller with a layout similar to this or this. Nintendo 64 games just play better this way. And for all you folks out there that have tried to play any of these games on the Nintendo Switch, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It ain't fun. The Analogue 3D is built from the ground up to preserve the multiplayer legacy of the Nintendo 64. Ask anyone who remembers this 90s console fondly, and they will no doubt have stories of gathering with their friends and family and rocking a 4-player race in Mario Kart 64 or 4-player slappers-only deathmatch in GoldenEye 007. Even PlayStation and Saturn didn't do this natively without extra hardware. It was what the Nintendo 64 did best. And the Analogue 3D is no different. It allows you to plug up 4 original N64 controllers or 4 wireless 8-bit Do 64 controllers. You can even mix and match. Each controller port on the front has an LED. If a Bluetooth controller connects to that port, it lights up to let you know it's active. Plug a real controller in, and the light goes off, and the physical controller takes over. It's pretty seamless. The only hitch we found in our testing, though, was that the 8-bit Do built-in Rumble for Player 2, 3, and 4 is tied to Player 1. Only wireless 8-bit Do 64 controllers can toggle between built-in Rumble and built-in memory, and only on Player 1 can you access this toggle. If they turn off their Rumble, everyone using a wireless 8-bit Do 64 loses Rumble. This lack of per-player customization is a bit disappointing and hopefully can be ironed out in a future update. Getting 4 controllers connected in any orientation you want is easy. And easy is exactly what you're looking for when you're getting into multiplayer. We were sent a full complement of 4 8-bit Do 64 gamepads to try out, but we also threw in original controllers for fun. Everything worked great, as long as your original N64 thumbstick was still in good condition, that is. You better believe we spent a good long while playing as many multiplayer games as we could. and it made me realize something. Another way the Analogue 3D completely rewrites the multiplayer experience is those experimental overclocking modes I was talking about earlier. If you ever played a heated 4-person split-screen experience on any Nintendo 64 game, you'll likely remember just how slow that gameplay could get. Well folks, this here is gonna change it up. When you're running one of these special modes, you're likely to see smoothed out gameplay and higher frame rates that will keep everyone on their feet. Explosions in GoldenEye 007 from the infamous proximity mine placements that would have slowed the frame rates to single digits? No longer a concern. For any folks who played this game at launch with their buddies, it's time to call the gang back up, because the upgrade you dreamed of is real, and it's happening right here. Not every single game will run properly with these modes turned on though. If you play a 4-player Mario Kart 64 race with Unleashed, buddy, prepare yourself for not just 150cc mode, you're gonna be getting 5000cc mode. You might find this incredibly hilarious to play, but a good game this does not make. But this got me thinking, if choosing the right settings on the Analogue 3D can make good games even better, what can it do for unplayably bad games? You knew I had to do it, right? Superman 64, a game so bad it'll give you nightmares. Nothing could make this game playable, nothing. But check this out. This is me sweeping through the first level with barely any issues at all. I've never seen this before. On a real Nintendo 64 with a now heavily used controller, this game is an absolute nightmare to play. But with these new Hall Effect controllers and the ability for the game to be boosted, you'll be flying through this game. Quite literally. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't make Superman 64 good. The game is still trash, and the longer you play it, the more intense your headache is gonna get. But I find it really interesting that even some bad titles suddenly just got a much needed tune-up with this console. So if there's an N64 game you hated your first time trying it, maybe give it a shot on the Analogue 3D. You could be pleasantly surprised. In fact, we didn't put a single cartridge in this console that didn't run. North American games, import Japanese games, PAL region games, well, yeah, those worked as well. Even cartridges you might not expect, like the EverDrive 64 X5 Multicart, with that, we ran many titles, everything worked great. And although you might not expect a PAL game to run on your modern screen, the Analogue 3D converts the game in a way that you can actually play it. No issues whatsoever. We even got a third-party cartridge to work as well, Pico Interactive's 40 Winks. During our testing, we encountered a failed recognition on an original Nintendo cartridge. After removing and reinserting the cart, it would always work the second time. We put the blame of this squarely on aged and well-loved cartridges and not on the analog system itself. These carts are several decades old, folks. It's bound to happen once in a while. When you insert your game cartridge, the Analogue 3D automatically adds the game to your library, which is a carousel of all your games showing information like publisher, release year, number of players, and what peripherals it works with. You have the ability to download community-created cartridge labels that will appear on the library entry as well. According to Analogue, this won't be included on the retail units shipped out, but was pre-installed on our review unit. It adds a nice visual touch to the experience. Also, at the time of our review, the information in the library didn't seem to be fully accurate, but I'm positive that it can be fixed with an update. There's a space for date added and playtime that never changed, and it lists 40 Winks as a one-player game when it actually supports two-player co-op. Also, it said Superman 64 is a multiplayer game, and that's gotta be a mistake. I've never seen multiplayer in that game.
Have you ever tried to plug in a second controller?
No way! This game has multiplayer? Do you know what that means? Let's talk about a title we all know, a game we all revere, a wonderful racing experience that I'm not sure many people really actually care about, but they should. Folks, I'm talking about a little spicy electronic arts joint called Beetle Adventure Racing. what we need to talk about can be found in the very beginning of the game during its intro sequence. Wait, so we're actually gonna get into this? Details and stuff? Okay. See this Volkswagen Beetle jumping over a river? On a real Nintendo 64, just before it splashes into the water, the word action appears on the screen over top the vehicle. You can see its back right wheel just under the letter C, if you look close enough. However, when you run this on the Analogue 3D and force original hardware mode, the sequence stops earlier. The game is completely functional and plays extremely close to real hardware, but as this intro shows, the cart isn't playing 100% nice with the Analogue. Analogue can, and likely will, update this system and tune its performance like they've done on prior consoles, and I reached out to them and let them know that this was happening. But do you want to see something cool? Something I'm pretty sure nobody ever noticed but us? And also shows just how amazing the Analogue 3D is? Go back to that intro sequence on a real Nintendo 64. If you plug in a rumble pack to your controller, the intro, for some reason, runs slower, meaning the Beetle hasn't gotten as far on the jump before the sequence freezes. Plug up 3 rumble packs, the more unstable this gets. And folks, let me remind you, this is on real hardware. This slowdown is replicated on the Analogue 3D. With 3 physical rumble packs or 3 wireless 8-bit Do controllers set to rumble on the Analogue 3D, it slows down the game just like the real hardware would. And I'm pretty sure, heck, I know the folks at Analogue had no idea this issue existed. Yet their hardware, despite the original intro being a hair slow, is so close to the original performance that it replicated this rumble pack slowdown. They're replicating legitimate hardware flaws from the Nintendo 64 that maybe even the developers of these games didn't know about. That's nuts! If there is one takeaway you'll... Wait a second. If there is one takeaway you'll get from our review here, it should be this. Analogue is not playing around, because that is some serious engineering. So, after all that, let's answer my big question that started this whole review. Is the Analogue 3D better than a real Nintendo 64? Yep. It is. It pretty much does everything I want a Nintendo 64 to do. I didn't run into a single game it couldn't play, and Analogue says they support 100% of the library, and I believe them. I can use Nintendo's official original peripherals or use fancy brand new Bluetooth gamepads. All this with a clean, modern 4K output and some enhancement options for your favorite games. It's official. This is now the way I'm going to be playing any Nintendo 64 game moving forward. I can't see any reason to use my aging original gear when this is working so well. Analogue has done it again. Nintendo 64's entire catalog just got a brand new lease on life.